Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. Joining us now from rattleandhumsports.com and covering the Big 12, Kevin Lonnquist. How you doing, Kevin?
Great to talk with you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. Before we get into the Big 12 for the week, tell us a little bit about your background. I know you've had some big-time experience working and covering the Big 12 over the years.
Yeah, I've been a reporter for about 22 years when I got out of school, and I've been and I had at one time worked for the major dailies, the Dallas Morning News and the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, covering some of the major events. I've covered the days of the Southwest Conference. I was with an offshoot of the Morning News called the Arlington Morning News, where I was the beat writer for the Texas Rangers and covered them in the late 90s when they won the American League West Championships in 1996, 98, and 99. And then I moved into private business in 2004, but, once a reporter, it's hard to get it out of your system. So I've been doing some things here and there, and when our proprietor, Tommy Smith, and I met up through a mutual friend back in the spring, he told me what his site was all about, and I kind of have an entrepreneurial flair myself, and so I figured let's give this a shot. I told him what my vision was for the site, and as far as the conference was concerned, because it was a conference that had a lot of interesting moving parts to it, and I thought it would be a good idea to see where we could take this, and I think we've gotten some pretty good traction to this point.
Outstanding. Well, it's an excellent site, and we're really glad to have you come on today and talk about Big 12 football with us. So let's get right into it. TCU plays their very first Big 12 ball game at Kansas. In my mind, it seems a little unfair that Texas A&M would have to open against Florida for the first SEC game, and TCU gets to play a team that barely plays football at Kansas.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things for that. Number one is probably just the way some of the early scheduling with some of the other teams, as far as maybe some crossover and some regional stuff, and as far as the late games that are being scheduled in December, that affected that. Plus the fact, I think, the way the scheduling broke down when the athletic directors met last year, that maybe there was something to the fact that Gary Patterson, who's a Kansas native, would be great to have him come back to the state to open up the conference for his school with TCU, even though Gary is a Kansas State grad. But still, I think there might have been something to that. But at the same time, that if you want to get the Horned Frogs off to a good start, it's a good way to do it in Lawrence. It won't be easy there. I'm sure KU will be pretty fired up to play this football game. Keep in mind last year that Kansas, which was probably as worse, if not worse, than in 2011, had Baylor on the ropes last year. They led Baylor 24-3 going into the fourth quarter and actually wound up losing that game in overtime, and that was with the Heisman Trophy winner, Robert Griffin III. So I think, Bryan, when you get to conference play, things are a little bit different. Everyone kind of takes it up a notch in terms of the intensity, and we'll see what kind of shots Kansas can fire off early in the game and how the Horned Frogs respond. And I think the Horned Frogs will respond. It might just take a quarter to get used to the everything, and then they should be fine after that.
Do you think it's a possible trap game then?
I think it just depends on if the Horned Frog players don't take it as seriously, looking at it saying, oh, this is just kind of like playing New Mexico or UNLV like we did in the Mountain West. I don't think Gary Patterson will let them get away with that just because of the fact that it is a new conference. They want to get their new status as a BCS member school off on the right foot. And, Gary's a pretty hard-nosed guy, and he'll make sure that he has his players' attention. And even though they pretty much put a good beat down on Grambling last week, I think he will remind them that this is a new era. We're a program that's worked hard to be in this position. Let's don't blow this opportunity to make a good start.
Okay. Now, taking a look at some of the other ball games that are going on, one of the games that catches my attention is Texas, a top 20 team, going to Ole Miss. Granted, it's an SEC team, but they haven't played anybody. They've got a new coaching staff going here, and Texas goes into this thing still not having faced real tough competition so far. Are they going to prove anything by beating Ole Miss on the road here this weekend?
Oh, I think what they would prove is that they can win an important game on the road. And again, I think even if Alabama or Florida or LSU, when you win on the road in the conference, let's never discount the importance of winning on the road. When you win on the road in the SEC, that's always a big win, just because, as we mentioned a moment ago with the TCU game, the intensity just reaches another level. I think for Texas's standpoint tonight, they're going to really have to, or I should say Saturday night, I think what they're going to really have to do is just set the tempo defensively. They've given up some big plays with that celebrated unit of theirs. They had a hard time getting New Mexico off the field last week in terms of the Lobos controlling the clock. Even though they pitched the shutout, they gave up a couple of big plays to Wyoming. So they're going to have to tighten some things down because Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss has a wide-open attack. They have put some points on the board. Granted, that's against some lesser competition. But I think it's a good test for the defense. I think the greater test is for David Ash, the starting quarterback. He's been efficient in the first two games against Wyoming and New Mexico. Hasn't made a lot of mistakes, but now he's got to prove it on the road. I think that's when we're going to find out a lot more about him than anything else in this ball game.
What's your gut feel and first impressions of Texas so far, though?
Oh, I think they're a good team. They haven't done anything to just say, wow, this is a great football team. I've had my reservations about the Longhorns pretty much since spring practices started. I'm still really not sold on the quarterbacking situation, regardless of if it's David Ash for now and if Case McCoy were to come in or if they wind up splitting it as the season unfolds. I think there's just sooner or later they're going to have to make some plays in the passing game, and that's what I want to see tomorrow night in Oxford is if David can make some plays if they're up against it with a third and long deep in their own territory, or if the game is tight and they have the ball and they have to have a drive to finish off the Rebels, or maybe they have to rally and win that game. So David really has to step up and make some plays in my mind in order for me to change my tune on this team. I think defensively they will get better. They're going to have to tighten things up, as I mentioned a moment ago. For me, the jury is still out on this team. That's great that they're ranked, in the top 15 in both the polls, but I'm still not seeing it yet with this squad.
Kevin Lonnquist from RattleandHumSports.com on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM. Which surprised you more last week, the way Kansas State manhandled Miami or the fact that Oklahoma State lost at Arizona?
That's a great question. I think really I would probably put the Kansas State thumping of Miami probably is a bigger surprise. I think most people thought that Kansas State was going to win the game by 39 points. I don't think we were expecting that, but but when you have a veteran quarterback like Colin Klein, it just seems like. And I watched some of that game last week. I thought that Colin just has a great command of that offense. He knows what he wants to do with the football. He's a solid decision maker. Bill Snyder has talked about the fact that he really likes the way that he understands his role and it's just taking his role as a leader another step forward, which is important when you have a veteran quarterback. With Oklahoma State, I think the one thing that surprised me was how sloppy the Cowboys were against a program in Arizona, which is under Rich Rodriguez, only 2 games into his tenure. The thing that's when you commit 4 turnovers and have over 160 yards in penalties, you're pretty much asking to get beat, and that's what happened. And then Wes Lunt throws a pick 6 in that game. That was just a killer for them. But the other thing with the Cowboys, and I think even Mike Gundy talked about it, the fact that maybe the 84-0 defeat of Savannah State was not a good thing for his club. And I kind of felt that way even after they won impressively because Wes Lunt, what did they play? Maybe the first quarter, and that was it. So you didn't really know anything about this team. They get a road test, and they pretty much got it handed to them. And see, Brian, the one thing that bothers me about the Cowboys, if you look at this team defensively, last year that unit gave up a lot of yards, but they also were fortunate to create a lot of turnovers. Now, that's Bill Young, their defensive coordinator, is doing. Bill's not on the sideline yet. It's still up in the air, I think, if they're going to happen for Louisiana Lafayette. But at the same time, I think it's going to be important for them to try and establish a presence. And if that Oklahoma State defense continues along this journey of giving up a lot of yards without creating the turnovers, this could be a pretty tough season for the Cowboys. A bowl season, but not the kind of season that I think a lot of people were hoping for.
Okay, and is there anything else on the Big 12 schedule in a pretty kind of a week that catches your fancy?
Yeah, it is kind of a week for the conference. I mean, obviously, you have a couple of, I would say FCS opponents against some against the power brokers here. You've got James Madison against West Virginia. That game's at FedEx Field in Landover, Maryland, where the Washington Redskins play. And then you have Sam Houston State against Baylor tomorrow night out in Waco. The one thing that's kind of interesting about those games, even though both teams should handle them, both Baylor and West Virginia should win those games handily, is that you have James Madison ranked number 4 in the FCS, and you have Sam Houston ranked number 2. And remember, Sam Houston State was playing for the FCS National Championship last week. So anything can happen. We saw a couple years ago where James Madison won at Blacksburg against Virginia Tech, pulling off that upset, and then we saw was about 5-6 years ago where Appalachian State went to Michigan and won that game. So these are games where these programs should take care of business, get control of the game by the end of the first quarter. But it's kind of fun to see how these FCS teams treat this game because they know it's kind of their one-shot deal. They're going to throw everything at them and just see how both Baylor and West Virginia respond. But other than that, the conference schedule is pretty blah, and then you have Oklahoma, which has the week off.
Yeah, it's not real attractive this week beyond the couple of games that we mentioned here. Now, you wrote on rattleandhumsports.com about the news of Notre Dame joining the ACC, and it seems like Notre Dame pretty much called the shots on this thing. They entered the conference on their terms, and you've talked about the Big 12 and whether they might have been caught by surprise on this thing or not, but is there any way that Notre Dame could have come into the Big 12 on the terms that the ACC agreed to?
I think it would have been really hard to do that. I think it would have been really hard from a scheduling standpoint to do that. With the ACC now with 14 teams, with Pittsburgh and Syracuse joining next year, that probably makes it a little bit easier to float some games out there. But with the Big 12 running a round-robin schedule, there would have been a lot of tinkering and a lot of maneuvering that the athletic directors had to do. Keep in mind, too, Brian, that the athletic directors for the conference only met last year to put the 2012 schedule. They haven't even met yet to put together future schedules. So if you bring the Irish in, and if the Irish want to play, I don't know if it would have been 5, but if they even wanted to play maybe 3 games against Big 12 opponents, that would have thrown a lot of things off. And then that would have forced the Big 12 to actually maybe adding the second school to make the schedule and then create divisions, and then off we go again with 12 teams, hence the name. But still, to do that, I think that, plus the fact, I think that Notre Dame looked at the fact that at the landscape and said, look, our ties are generally more toward the East, and while we enjoyed the Big East because we could play, as far as the basketball program is concerned, we could play at Madison Square Garden for the Big East tournament. We still have ties to the East Coast, so let's go to a better conference which has a better bowl tie-in. And with the ACC's affiliation and the stronger union with the Orange Bowl, I think that's probably why it made better sense for them to go east rather than go to the central part of the country.
Very good. Okay, Kevin, tell us how often we can see your stuff on rattleandhumsports.com and what we can be looking for.
Sure. Well, on Mondays, I have what is called a Big 12 Coaches Corner. It comes up on Mondays that I sit in on the call with the Big 12 coaches when they're taking questions from the media, and then I pretty much put a package together that will detail everything that the coaches talk about or some of the highlights of that press conference. And then on Thursday, we call it the Big 12 Extra, where I pick a topic that might have come from the Coaches Corner or something that I've identified through my research and things of that nature, and then just talk about that as the lead item. Then I'll get the fans set up for the weekly set of games for the upcoming weekend, and then I'll have my traditional power rankings. If you always want to look at the power rankings, because everyone does one and everyone wants to have some water cooler talk, so I'm fulfilling that mission for those folks who want to take a look at it and say, well, that guy Lonnquist doesn't know what he's doing if he has Iowa State here and Oklahoma here or whatever. And then we just have some notes at the end. One thing to let you know about, too, with the power rankings, if you go to our website and click on the link as far as the NCAA is concerned, you can go to the Big 12 icon underneath, and then it'll drop down so you can pick up the latest Big 12 conference power rankings, and that'll always be a staple. So that if you don't get into the Big 12 Extra, you can find those power rankings under that link as well.
Outstanding. Kevin, thanks very much. It's great talking to you. You guys do great work, and we're excited about the future of the website, and really enjoyed talking to you today. Thank you very much.
But you all have a great weekend.
Thank you, sir. Kevin Lonnquist from rattleandhumsports.com, covering the Big 12 on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.